Alright, another episode of the Idiot's Approach, and today we're working on soffit. So soffit is that stuff right there with all the holes in it. So that's what's covering the overhang of your roof. So we're putting it on the deck here. Tried my best to get somebody to come and do this for me, but people just take too long. So you can see I've already got several pieces of the soffit running down that way. Now, there's a couple of different ways to secure the soffit to the edge of your beam. Now, I'm using J-channel because I had a whole bunch of J-channel left and I didn't want to waste it. This is J-channel. It's shaped like a J. So another option is F-channel. So F-channel is shaped like an F. So instead of this J shape, you'd have your strip for securing it here, and then you would have two prongs coming out this way in the shape of an F, so that your soffit would go in this direction. And you would mount it against your header or your beam like this. So, because we're using the J channel and it has to be oriented this way, we had to add nailers to the beam. So I'll rip down some extra 2x12 that I had and installed this wood right here so that we can screw our J channel in, basically almost upside down, and then our soffit slides in here. So once you've got the J channel up, you've got your blocking on your corners down there, you have to start measuring to see how long you need your soffit. So you're going to put your measuring tape flush against your beam, your header, and you're going to look here, and we're at about 11.5. So if we cut it 11.5, once we get it inside the J channel, account for the thickness of the backside of that, it's going to be hanging over our fascia board a little bit, so we'll cut it short to about 11 3/8. Now, if you've done a decent job with your overhangs and kept everything square, it should be roughly 11.5 inches all the way down to the end. But that's almost never the case. So about every, I don't know, 8-10 feet, you're going to want to draw another measurement so that you're not cutting every piece of your soffit at a length that isn't going to fit. And that all just depends on how bad your fascia board is warped or how consistent your distances are. So if you're working on something wonky and old, you're going to have to measure probably more often than that. So we just skipped a whole bunch of stuff, like a whole day's worth of work. Getting the nailers up, putting the J channel on there. I'm not going to bore you with the process of ripping these down. If you got a table saw and you've ever used it, you know how to rip something down to a specific width. So we cut this 2x12 down, and then we nailed it on the header, the beam, whatever you want to call it. Now, you have to make sure to mark a plumb line from the edge of your fascia board to the header, because you want your fascia sitting level. Now, you can see so far what we have down there is sitting pretty flat relative to the edge of the fascia board. And the way to do that is to throw your spirit level up, flush against the bottom of your fascia board, and line your bubble up. So you get your bubble in the middle, and you make a line right there. You see I've already done that. Now what that does is allow us to screw the soffit into the fascia board and make sure that it's setting level, or at least partially level, as it slides into the J channel. Now if you've got F channel, you're just going to line the bottom of your F channel up, screw it into your header, and you're good to go. But we don't have that. We're using J-channel in this instance, so we have to account for the thickness of this J-channel. Because if we put our nailer down here, our J-channel is going to be down here, and that's going to throw our level off. And our soffit will be tilted this way. So, once you've got your plumb mark here, and you're going to measure several times along the length of this, obviously. So, you get your plumb mark, and then you're going to account for the thickness of this J-channel oriented this way. And this is the line where your nailer should rest. And then you're just going to secure it all the way down at that line. Now, you can snap a chalk line, run a masonry line with a line level on it, but I like to optimize my risk for injury and mistakes and work alone a lot of times. So what I did was get my line and decide where the bottom of my nailer was going to rest. I did that. This is my nailer, this is where it's resting. I measured this distance right here from the bottom of the header to the bottom of my nailer. Now I'm pretty confident that my beams are level along their bottom, and I can assume with a minimal margin of error that that distance is going to be the same all the way down the beam. So what I did was make this little jig out of some scrap so that I could hold it against the bottom of my header like this. And then I knew if this nailer is resting on the top of this flush, I can maintain some semblance of level all the way along the length of the deck. I made a couple of these, and I would clamp them along the distance of my header so that I could rest the other end of my nailer on this without trying to hold an 8-foot piece by myself while I'm standing on a ladder. Now I like to limit myself, to one fall off of a ladder per project, and I've already met that quota yesterday. In fact, it happened pretty quickly into the job, so I've really got to hedge my bets on the rest of this one. So I've steered clear of the extension ladder down there. Fortunately, I can set my step ladders up, and with some strain on my back, managed to reach the rest of this and secure it in. So there's that part. Got that covered. Now, we've got to go back, cut these down to 11 3/8, probably cut like 5, 6, 7 or so at a time. Now, these are, roughly 11.5, 12 inches wide, so you're covering about a foot of span with every piece that you cut. And if you're confident with your distances and you're making your measurements about every 8 feet or so, you can cut 8 pieces at a time. It's a real pain, though, if you get it too short and it won't fit, that's a wasted piece. Or if you get it too long and then you got to come back and trim the edges of that soffit off of the fascia board, because if it's hanging over the fascia board too much, you're not going to get your soffit metal on there easily. So let's go cut those. So we're cutting this soffit with a circular saw. There's any number of ways to cut this stuff. In my experience, this is the fastest. So we're using this little 6.5 inch Porter cable, portable circular saw. And what I've done is take the blade off and reverse it so that when it runs, the blade's actually running backwards the way you would normally want it to. If you run it the correct way, it's going to tear this to pieces. It's going to break up and shatter. But if you've got it running backwards, you can see it cuts a pretty decent edge on there. So you can use this, you can use snips, you can use your utility knife and cut it and then snap it. But those take a lot of time. In my experience, a circular saw is the quickest way to get it done. You can use a miter saw too. You may have to reverse the blade on that if you can, but it's just so much easier to stick this on the tailgate of my truck or a couple sawhorses and cut it with a circular saw, because you gotta have the miter saw stand and everything else And my experience, this is probably the best way to do it. So we've already got several pieces up. It's time to cut some more. We made our measurements, about 11 3/8, so we'll go measure some more and cut a bunch off there. All right, so we're measuring cutting here. Cutting one piece at a time is a little slow. And if your saw can handle it, and you're confident you can secure this well enough, you can cut 2 pieces at a time. Makes it a little faster, so you get 2 pieces of soffit for every run of the saw. So soffit material is generally going to come in a 12-foot length. And there's a couple of different variations, well, more than a couple of different variations. So there's a no vent, there's a full vent, there's a half vent, or center vent rather. So this is center vent. It was either this or unvented. I don't know that it's necessary to put a vent on this because it's just the roof over the deck. It probably isn't, but we get a lot of moisture here. It rains a lot. I've already got some spots of mold growing on the ceiling, so I'm going to edge on the side of caution and use a vent. So I have full vent on the rest of my house, and if you're really concerned about consistency, you could just stop being impatient and order the full vent and wait, but that doesn't work for me. So anyway, we got the center vent, and it's going to look okay. And it'll provide some ventilation to the underside of the ceiling and the roof. Now, we said earlier we need a length of about 11 3/8, so that's what we've done here. Through a measurement, 11 3/8, marked our line, used a square to extend our line all the way across it. We're going to use our handy dandy circular saw to rip it along that line. So I've been doing my measurements, like I said, about every 8 feet. I think this time around we'll make 4 cuts, get 8 pieces because we got 2 stacked on each other, and then we'll sling those up, draw a couple more measurements to make sure that we don't need to change the length, and then continue on. Total of about 45 feet, so we got a few more of these to do. So a couple important things about throwing the soffit on. Obviously we're securing it to the fascia board. Now these pieces have ridges in them, and that's where you're going to want to put your screws. I like to use hex heads if I can. This is what the store had, so I bought these deck screws, exterior screws. Now you're really only going to want to put these about every other slot. You don't need to fill every one of these ridges up with a screw, because when you come back with your soffit metal, you're going to pre-drill those and drive your finish nails into this other slot, and that will fully secure it down. And another thing that I like to do, especially when I get started with my first piece or two, is to throw a square up and just make sure that it's remotely square. Because if you're starting off at an angle, the rest of your soffit is going to be angled and look ridiculous and fall out of the J-channel. Another thing too is you don't want to jam this all the way back into the back of the J-channel as hard as you can. The idea of the J-channel is not just to secure this, but to act as an expansion gap. Because anytime vinyl siding and trim, you're going to have some expansion and contraction as the temperatures change throughout the day and throughout the year. So you want to have a small gap to allow for that expansion. And because we're putting these screws and nails down pretty tight in these ridges, you need to have a little extra space inside of the J-channel for your soffit material to expand and contract as temperatures change. And that goes for the siding too. You know, when you're putting screws, nails, whatever in a piece of vinyl siding or trim, you're going to want to use those little slotted holes, and you don't want to cinch it down tight, because then it won't allow it to expand and contract. It'll just buckle, fall out of its J-channel, or just look terrible. So as we go along, every so often we'll check it with the square, slide it into the J-channel, and put a screw in. Now these pieces interlock, and that's what this little track right here is for. The back side of it has this lip, and so each subsequent piece will slide into that lip and lock lock in. So when you put these in, you're going to pull a slight amount of tension to keep it in that channel. You don't want to pull too much because then you just get everything flattened out, throws your square off. So you're going to fit it in the J channel, not terribly snug, and then drive a screw into every other ridge here. Now, my recommendation is to use one of these handy dandy doodads, because it's really a pain trying to drive this in with a straight bit and having the screw wobble all over the place as it gets started. And a sliding mechanism on here keeps that screw in place and keeps it from falling off the bit, so you're not standing here for 20 minutes getting every screw started. And as you push, it retracts and allows you to get it flush. And again, you don't want to drive these super tight, you just want to secure it. And, the tighter you get this vinyl siding, the more it's going to warp in the future with temperature changes. I think that just about covers all of this. So we'll finish this up, and then when we get to the fascia metal, we'll get some more videos started then. Probably going to have to suck it up and get some help with the fascia metal, because I'm going to bend the hell out of it if I try to do this on my own, and probably fall off the ladder more than the allotted single ladder failure per project. Alright, so we got the soffit up and I started putting the fascia. Had to recruit some help from my friends Granny, Chad, Jethro, Ellie Mae, the Clampett family. This little brace up here to hold one end of the metal so it's not flopping in the wind. So we're about halfway, or a little over halfway with it. On the corners here, we did things a little different. So I measured from the back side of my header, or the post here, to the end, drew a line down the corner, and then cut these at a 45, and just bent the metal around it. So let's take a look at these corners. I'm sure there's a better way to do this. This is the way that I figured on doing it. So again, we got about 15.5 inches from the front of the beam to the back side of that post like we showed earlier. So I measured 15.5 inches down here, made my line, and then I threw my square on here at a 45, made my mark, and then cut those out with some snips. So when we bend this along this line, these two will come together and form a 90-degree angle. And what I do is something like this. I just hold this board along my line, firm against that, and then just pull this piece up and fold it in half slowly. Now these have to slip underneath the drip edge, which is the major challenge here, particularly by yourself. That's what the clamps are for. So I'm using that and some cheap plastic spreaders to squeeze it in there. So once you get it up flush to the bottom of your fascia board, you're going to pre-drill these holes. You can see that. And then drive some finish nails in through there. And obviously you want to use a finish hammer, because a framing hammer is going to peel all the paint off of these. Alright, so a little bit on drilling these holes. Basically we want to just get through the metal, maybe a little bit of the plastic on the soffit. You don't want to drill a big hole in the wood, because then you're not going to grip with the nail. And you also want to use a drill bit that is a little bit smaller than your nail, but not by much, because then if you use too big of a bit, you're going to have a hole that's just going to let the nail drop out. And when you're hammering these in, you don't need to get crazy with it. If you put too much on it, you're going to bend the metal or break the nail, and that's a whole big pain in the butt you don't want to deal with. So like we did earlier, or discussed earlier, the screws are in about every other ridge here. So we're putting a nail in the ridges we left open. We're not nailing every little ridge all the way down. So this is what we've got so far. And at the moment, everything's going together pretty good. Now there's one little piece of information that may or may not matter. It just depends on what you like. So putting siding on, you want your overlaps to be in a flow with your field of vision. So if you're walking up to the house, you don't want to look onto the butt end of an overlap. So generally, you're going to overlap it in this direction. There's my overlap there. So I'm walking up to the house, and I'm not going to see that for the most part. So we're going to apply this same principle with the soffit metal here. So I started on that end, and my overlaps are going in the same direction that they are with the siding. Now, on a quick glance, you really can't see them all that well. But if you turn, look this way, there's one, right? So that's why we started on that end and came this way. And what I've been doing is, on each overlap, cut about an inch off of the bottom lip of the soffit metal, right there, and then overlap it, try to butt those ends together, and that way you don't have an open seam there in the front of the fascia. So you get the general idea. That's my idiot's approach to it. And again, this is an affront to any professional. If you don't know what you're doing and you can't do it safely, just hire somebody. But if you want to try it, do your best. Just because you're an idiot doesn't mean you have to do anything halfway.